All right, so we'll do just kind of a brief large group discussion about how that went. Any questions, concerns that came out of facilitating the mindful movements or mindful walking?
We noted that the script, as it's written, doesn't have a little check-in between the second and third mindful walking. But I think we usually do a check-in, and you did one, and I was like, yeah, I actually feel like with kids especially, that's a weird thing that we just did. So even taking a quick moment to just check in about like, what was that like for you? Yeah, just to process it quickly and then move on.
It would be good to add to our annual to make sure that's in there. Any other thoughts that came out of that? In the A session, those are really nice change of pace from what's more sitting and didactic focus for the first portion of A. So it's nice to get into the longer practice where they're really moving and working to introduce that open awareness practice that we talked about of thinking about bodily sensations, thoughts, and feelings, kind of whatever arises.
I think with the movement ones, because like as the facilitator, you're also doing it along with them. It becomes more important to like practice it yourself ahead of time and feel like you really know how you would lead that with somebody, because you can't be like, and here's what so in order to just to help it flow a little easier, that practice in particular I think lends itself well to like practicing a little bit on your own.
Yeah, and really thinking about what the key takeaway experiences are out of those, so you can remember even if you forget everything else, kind of what do I want to remind people of. So for those, what do you think that is? Kind of the key takeaway for participants. Say you're in the middle of it and you've completely forgotten everything but one thing. What's the one thing that would be most helpful to remember out of those mindful movements and mindful walking?
For me, I think it's like, the breath is one anchor, but also like whatever kind of movements you're going through throughout the day is another anchor that you can use in mindfulness.
And we like to remind like teens about like you can do this at school, you can practice this in your desk, like you're feeling stressed before a test. Like having an opportunity to move your body a little bit can not only notice the stress, but then help you to like do something to actively take care of yourself in that moment that might decrease that stress a little bit.
I think another important thing is thinking back to the foundation stuff that we talked about. This is kind of a transition point away from focused attention to open awareness. And so these mindful movement practices are really the first time we're giving them explicit instructions to notice whatever arises in the field of attention. And so to remember that as an important part of these three. And giving them, we did them a little more quickly today than we would, like we're doing with a lot of things, the group program, but giving them time to have bodily sensations, thoughts, and feelings was kind of hard to do in the space we did today. But that's another key moment of transition is you can also, not only are there different targets of our attention, but you can be open and not just focused on one individual element of attention. Anything else you think about that? That would be good to
No, I think I totally agree, and I think just to expand on one point is that I think it's awareness of the internal and the external,
Yes.
right? And so like this idea of like, mindful movement is about paying attention to what's arising in yourself and then also observing the world around you. And so I think the more you can sort of be walking them through, like, so just as we practice mindfulness with, this, and now we're gonna, that transition of like how it applies to what you're doing, and then this is a new way. And one thing that's come up for us is that I think some teens just will latch onto different things, and so I like the mentality of presenting it as like, this is just another way that you can practice mindfulness. And so for some people, like the mindful movement may tend to feel like easier, you get kids that are just fidgety or, more hyper, and this really works for them, whereas other people this doesn't work at all, and they might find that more sitting meditation is helpful. So one other tool on our repertoire of learning about mindfulness and how we can practice mindfulness.
Any other thoughts about those before we transition to T?
Have you ever had kids ask if they can practice sports mindfully or like karate or anything like that? Like say they don't want to sit there in the chair, have they asked like, oh, is this something I can do in like sports or like I just said?
Yeah, I feel like that's.
I don't know if they've asked about it so much as it's come up in the like
mindfulness
discussion.
life maybe part.
Yeah.
Like some people say, like I do sports mindfully.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I don't think anyone's asked about it, but
Yeah.
you could definitely say that you could do that just by focusing on like, the sensations in your body when you do them or.
And I think if that is a point that really resonates with somebody, say like, that a lot of top performing athletes, that they'll talk about a mindful approach to their sport. So they're not listening to music, they're not distracted, but they're actually really present. Like where is my body? What's my body doing right now? Can I change something to make sure that I'm at peak performance? Like that's very consistent with playing sports and might fit well with their interests.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that could be good for buy-in too, because, teens really admire athletes a lot,
Mhm.
so.
So I just have one other follow-up question. So, when you're facilitating, and I'm just going by, I mostly got to observe Megan today, when you're facilitating, there's a lot of encouragement of observation or open awareness, as Rachel said, like without trying to change it. So how do you explain that with also the benefit of stress reduction that Stephanie was talking about? So how do those fit together?
Thinking about the open awareness allows us to move beyond whatever the focus is of our stress right in that moment, to expand actually what we're noticing, and that there are also things in our lives that are in our immediate experience that are not stressful.
Yeah. And say like most of our stress comes from, ruminating about the past or worrying about the future, so coming into the present moment through open awareness can be helpful to kind of separate yourself from those worries.
Or like a hyper focus on like one part of our body that is aching rather than like the whole experience, yeah. Yeah, I think teens, I don't know what your all experiences have been, but I think teens have different levels of access points to those messages, so just sort of keeping that in mind, But I think this idea that, I think sometimes that can be confusing to people. The idea between like, it's for not having as much stress, but don't change it, don't change anything. So sometimes sort of those messages can have to be massaged a little bit to explain that or to have some buy-in for that.
I see what you're saying. It's like, okay, so to change it, you should not want to change it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think using some of the stuff we talked about in the foundations about, maybe not necessarily using this language, but those ideas about how many problems there are if we have very low distress tolerance. And that so much of what these practices are is also working to gradually increase our distress tolerance, which then makes some things less stressful. Like that when we can distance ourselves a little bit, that it makes things, we can discern whether this is important, this is relevant, is it true? Like these types of things, kind of distancing can also increase our tolerance for stress, and that can then make more minor stressors feel less stressful when we're better able to tolerate that discomfort. So I think weaving in some of those ideas when those questions come up.
And the best scenario is to hear it from the kids themselves,
Yeah.
right? So like when they are noticing in their daily life that they're practicing mindfulness, when they ride their bike or do martial arts or whatever it is, when they can talk about like that benefit, then you don't have to sell it for them, then they can sell it to the group themselves.
And I'm thinking about this as a guided discovery. Like we want to ask questions that get those answers instead of just telling teens about like, here's why mindfulness is great, but try and create conditions where they can really better understand that and share it with each other.